The sun was sinking over the Wyoming plains when Caleb Hart dismounted his horse and looked toward the horizon. The air shimmered gold around the edges of the cottonwoods, and the faint song of a distant creek rolled like a memory through the stillness. He was 34, a man built by dust and solitude, his skin tanned by years of riding fences and driving cattle. To the ranch hands, he was Mr. Hart, quiet, steady, the kind who didn't smile much unless there was a reason. But tonight, the air felt different. The small church in Dry Creek was glowing with lantern light, and a nervous energy stirred the crowd outside. Caleb straightened his hat and brushed his coat sleeve. He'd never imagined he'd be the one standing at that altar, least of all marrying a girl he'd met barely 3 weeks before. Her name was Evelyn Grace, 21, daughter of a ruined farmer whose debts had eaten every acre of his land. Caleb hadn't been looking for a wife, but something in her eyes had stopped him cold the first time he saw her. They were green, clear as spring water, holding both fear and quiet defiance. She'd been desperate to save her father from disgrace. Caleb, a man of few words, had offered his help in the only way that made sense in that town, marriage. Inside the church, the scent of pine oil and candle wax hung heavy. Caleb's boots echoed softly as he walked down the aisle. Every seat was full. Ranchers, wives, drifters, they all turned to watch the man known for his silence take a bride he barely knew. Then she appeared. Evelyn stood in the doorway, the sunset at her back, wearing a white cotton dress trimmed with lace that had seen better days. Her golden brown hair was braided and pinned, though a few curls had already broken free. She looked like the land itself, rough, beautiful, proud. When her eyes met Caleb's, the air between them seemed to still. The ceremony was short, the preacher speaking quickly before the light faded. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," Caleb hesitated for the briefest second. Evelyn looked up at him, her lips parted, trembling but brave. He touched her cheek gently and kissed her, slowly, reverently, as if she might vanish if he pressed too hard. The crowd erupted in cheers. But under the applause, there was a strange silence in her eyes. Not fear, something else. Something she hadn't said yet. That night, the wind swept through the ranch house, carrying the smell of rain and sage. Caleb led her inside quietly. He'd cleaned the place for days, fresh linens, polished wood, flowers from the creek bank in a chipped glass jar. He didn't know how to be a husband, but he knew what it meant to care for something fragile. Evelyn touched the petals, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You didn't have to do all this." Caleb looked away, clearing his throat. "Reckon I did. You're my wife now. Ought to feel like home." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains. She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his. "Do you ever get nervous, Mr. Hart?" He managed a rough smile. "Only when someone calls me, Mr. Hart. Makes me sound older than I feel." She laughed softly, and for the first time that night, the tension broke. They talked. Really talked. About her father, about the ranch, about the loneliness that clung to both their lives like dust. Every time she smiled, Caleb felt the weight he'd carried for years shift a little lighter. Hours passed. The rain came, drumming gently on the roof. When she finally stood and moved closer, the lantern light caught her hair like a halo. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Caleb," she said, "I want you to trust me tonight, as much as I trust you." He swallowed hard, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't since he was a boy. "You already got my trust, Evelyn." She hesitated, took a slow breath, and then whispered something that made him freeze. "Then give me the full 11 inches. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the rain. Caleb blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "What did you say?" Her cheeks burned crimson. "The board above our bed, it's crooked. You cut it short when you fixed the frame this afternoon. It's supposed to be 11 inches, not 10. He exhaled sharply, somewhere between relief and laughter. "Lord help me," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You nearly stopped my heart, woman." Evelyn giggled. Really giggled. until she was laughing so hard she had to sit down. "You should have seen your face," she gasped. "I thought you'd drop dead right there." Caleb couldn't help but laugh with her. It was a sound he hadn't made in years, low, warm, real. The tension melted between them, replaced by something gentler and far more dangerous. When he stepped closer and touched her hand, she didn't pull away. Her laughter softened, and her gaze lifted to meet his again. "You've been alone a long time," she said quietly. He nodded. "Too long, maybe." "Me too," she whispered. "But maybe we don't have to be anymore." The wind outside rattled the window, but inside the little ranch house, everything was still. Caleb brushed a stray curl from her face. "Evelyn Grace," he murmured, "I don't reckon I deserve much in this world, but I'll do right by you. That's a promise." Her eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "Then I'll hold you to it." The thunder faded, leaving only the rhythmic tap of rain on the roof, the slow, steady heartbeat of the plains. Caleb looked down at his new bride and realized, for the first time in years, that the silence of the land didn't scare him anymore. It was alive now, with her voice, her laughter, her warmth. And somewhere deep inside, the rancher who had lived half a life alone began to thaw. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the scent of rain and wild sage in the air. A new dawn waited beyond the dark. Morning came soft over the Wyoming plains. Mist curled above the tall grass, and the smell of rain lingered after the night's storm. Caleb was already awake, sitting on the porch steps with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands. He'd lived through dozens of dawns like this, but none had ever felt quite the same. Somewhere behind him, in the quiet of the house, Evelyn moved about, bare feet on the wooden floor, a faint hum in her throat. He smiled to himself. The sound filled the empty spaces he hadn't known were there. She joined him a few minutes later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair was loose this time, a golden tangle that caught the sunrise. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed him one fresh poured. "You were up before the rooster," she said. "Old habits," he replied. "Sunrise waits for no rancher." She looked out toward the fence line. "Does it ever get easier? All that land, all that work." Caleb took a slow sip. "No, but you stop minding the hard parts when there's someone to come home to." Evelyn blushed faintly. "You talk like an old poet." He chuckled. "A poet with sore hands and mud on his boots." The day began quietly. Caleb saddled his horse and rode the perimeter while Evelyn cleaned, baked, and explored the rhythm of the ranch. Every so often she'd stand on the porch, shielding her eyes, and watch him ride across the fields. There was something steadying about him, the way he moved through the land as though he belonged to it. By noon he returned, dusted with sweat and dirt. She had lunch waiting. Cornbread, beans, and a jar of wildflower honey she'd found in the pantry. When he sat down, she poured him water and hesitated. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe we could paint the barn red." "It looks tired." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Red paint costs money. I can sell a few things I brought, my mother's shawl, some trinkets." He shook his head. "We'll find another way. I won't have you given up what's left of your family." She studied him for a moment. "You're stubborn." "Reckon I am." "That's all right," she said softly. "So am I." The afternoon turned hot. They worked side by side fixing the fence, their hands brushing now and then as they passed nails or rope. The smallest touches carried a weight neither dared mention. Once, when a board slipped and Evelyn nearly fell, Caleb caught her by the waist. For a second their eyes met, too close, too aware. He set her gently down, clearing his throat. "You all right?" She nodded, her pulse quick beneath his fingers. "Just fine." Later, clouds gathered again over the hills. A storm was brewing, darker than the last. Caleb watched the sky. "Best get the horses in," he said. Together they hurried across the corral, wind whipping her hair loose. Thunder cracked, startling a young mare. The horse reared, rope snapping, and Evelyn stumbled back. Caleb lunged, pulling her clear as the mare bolted past. They fell hard in the mud, breathless, the rain beginning to pour. Evelyn laughed first, half shock, half relief. You've a talent for rescuing me, Mr. Hart. He looked at her, soaked and shining in the rain. You keep giving me reason to. They sat there a moment longer than they should have, faces close, the storm pounding around them. Then she stood and offered him her hand. Come on, hero. Let's get inside. By the time the horses were safe and the barn door shut, both were dripping wet. Inside, the smell of hay and rain mixed in the dim light. Evelyn wrung out her hair, shivering. Caleb grabbed a blanket from a nearby peg and draped it around her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. He hesitated. You're cold. A little. Without thinking, he drew the blanket tighter around her. His calloused fingers brushed the back of her neck, and she trembled, not from the chill. Evelyn, he said quietly, you sure about all this? The marriage, the ranch, me. She met his eyes, unflinching. I've never been more sure of anything. You treat me like I matter. You do. Then stop doubting it. Something inside him eased then. He reached up, tracing a strand of wet hair from her face. You got a way of speaking that makes a man forget himself. Maybe you need forgetting, just a little. The rain drummed harder on the roof, but neither of them moved. For the first time since the wedding, Caleb let the silence fill with something unspoken, trust, warmth, the promise of a beginning. He leaned his forehead against hers, eyes closed. No words, just the steady rhythm of rain and two hearts finding their pace. When the storm finally eased, they lit the lanterns and shared supper by the hearth. Evelyn played with the firelight, holding her hand up to cast small shadows on the wall. I used to think the world ended at our farm, she said. Now it feels endless. Caleb smiled. Guess that's what happens when you start building something new. As the night deepened, the ranch lay quiet again. Outside, the sky cleared, stars glittering like silver dust across the black. Caleb stood by the window, watching, while Evelyn set the blanket back on the chair. Tomorrow, she said, we should ride into town. I want people to see us together. He turned, surprised. They already saw us get hitched. Not like that. As partners. The word lingered. Partners. He liked the sound. All right, he said. Tomorrow we ride. She smiled, that quick, disarming smile that seemed to reach right through his guard. Good. Because I'm proud to be your wife, Caleb Hart. He looked at her, really looked, the determination in her eyes, the courage it took to start again in a world as harsh as theirs. In that moment, he knew the storms ahead wouldn't scare him half as much as losing the light she brought into his life. Outside, a coyote howled across the valley. Inside, the rancher and his young bride stood together, the last of the fire flickering between them. The night was white and silent, but their hearts were anything but. And as the wind swept gently through the open plains, Caleb realized something simple and unshakable: he wasn't frozen anymore.